Hi, and good evening. My name is Trey Reckling with the Academy of Cannabis Science, and we're really glad to have you here. We participate in live chats as part of our coursework. We think we hope it's the most engaging part of what we do. It's your opportunity to meet other people who are working in the industry from a variety of backgrounds, ask them questions, spend a little time with them, and get some more insight about this plant that we are all so passionate about, whether you use it or not. There's a lot to be learned because we've been under prohibition for years and years. And with that prohibition came laws. And boy, those laws have had tremendous effect on families. So it's our pleasure tonight to introduce somebody who has worked within the law to really protect a lot of folks, to protect their licenses, to protect their rights, to help hold regulators and lawmakers accountable, and somebody who's very brave doing so, but doing so with a smile. Thank you, Nicole Li, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Trey. I am delighted to be here. I'm so happy to be a part of the Institute. This is one of the most fun parts of the work that I do. I love talking with people about this subject, so I welcome any and all questions. A little bit about me. My law work actually focuses on healthcare. I've been a healthcare lawyer for about 12 years now. I do professional licensure defense is one of the things I do, which means that if you're a healthcare provider in Washington, if you're laying hands on people, if you're providing a healthcare service, you need to have a license. And that's actually what kind of got me into cannabis at the beginning, because back in the early days, the Washington State Department of Health that licenses healthcare providers had a steep learning curve when the initiative, that was a popular initiative, remember it was not a legislative push to allow marijuana to be regulated in the state. The Department of Health actually had a stance there for a while where they were dinging everyone that authorized. And that was not actually widely known until I took on a case and actually brought it to full formal hearing. And at that point, things started to shift. I'm not saying that it was just my case that shifted it. I think the Department of Health very smartly took the time to educate themselves on the realities of cannabis, because as I'm sure you're all aware, there's still a lot of stigma and a fair bit of ignorance as well around it. I also work in medical research ethics at the University of Washington on an institutional review board, which is a board that reviews the development of new drugs and devices. There is cannabis research going on. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about that today too.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because we have people on from two states. I know you're operating in Washington, but there's a lot of crossover, and that's kind of where I'd like to start tonight. I would like to also ask you some specific question for those people in class tonight who are training to be consultants, right? And but in a general sense, you know, there used to be an article in High Times, and this guy, he would sell videos, and it was like stay out of jail, and which is was a real concern, right, about with people using cannabis. But one of his things was, hey, just don't break two laws at once, whatever you do. If you got to break the law, he said, I'm not saying to break the law, but don't break two laws at once. Just talking about how people exponentially challenge the situation. Can you think of how that might apply to cannabis users?
Oh, yeah, that's actually, I don't practice criminal law, but that is a phrase that I've heard my criminal law lawyer friends use, which I just love. For example, if you're speeding, definitely use your turn signal. If you have more than an ounce of weed in your car, definitely don't speed, right? It's usually the second thing that will get you. So yeah, I mean, that's a very amusing way to remember the law.
And I know that was very random, but it's the little stuff that's going to matter in the end. And like I said, we would never advise anybody to break the law to begin with. As we talk about protecting ourselves and operating within the bounds, because in each state, we know it's a feudal system, at least for now. Each state has its own laws. What's something that you do to advise people just to stay free and clear of the law? I know it sounds kind of basic, there are rules, but I imagine you advise people on this, whether they're a licensee or a practitioner, healthcare practitioner.
Yes, that's right. And so, of course, I can't give legal advice to anyone who's not my client. So this is really educational. One of the things, but there are great resources out there. Again, even though I don't do criminal law, I keep my eye on what is criminal in the law. And a really useful resource is actually the ACLU. There are a couple of great websites out there that will describe what your rights are if you are stopped by the police. Always good to know. It's also nice to know criminal defense attorneys. Hopefully you never need to use one, but you know, if you ever need one, it's good to not have to go searching. And also, by the way, I maintain a wide network of attorneys too. So if anyone ever needs a lawyer, I'm just going to put in my email address into the chat box.
No,
yeah,
thank you.
and knowledge is power. So I would say, and the internet has a lot of information on it. So definitely take a look at that. ACLU came right to mind, but I know there's a couple of other really great websites that will, Normal's website, NORML, fantastic resources there, an amazing library of information. And they also have some guidance too, to stay out of trouble. And they started in like 1971, so they've been around for a long time.
And Rick Steves just became chairman of the board. So if you're a fan of Washington's own travel guru, Rick Steves, he's been a big time member and board member for years. And I think he donated $1 million to Washington's effort to legalize, and he's gone around the country and done the same. So mild-mannered guy that he is, he's a very strong advocate when it comes to this herb. And I know I recognize I'm asking you, these are criminal justice questions to lead off, but often that's what's in our mind when it comes to cannabis and the law. Talk to us a little bit. You talked about defending people's licenses. How is it? Are people with licenses, are healthcare people being treated differently than other people? Like, we're both 21. Actually, we should both have the right to consume and enjoy what's legal, right? Unless I'm driving a car, or is that not right?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. So the Department of Health stance for healthcare providers is that they themselves are not allowed to use cannabis for any reason, even if they have a medical condition. Their position is, if you are a physician, for example, and you have a condition for which medical marijuana helps you, you need to stop practicing while you're taking that drug, while taking that, using that plant. I think this is a legacy of the stigma and some ignorance that lingers on the part of the Department of Health. I've seen them actually say that there are unknown significant cognitive impairments that can happen even with one-time use. It's difficult to get them to, unfortunately, there is literature and studies that you can find to back up that. As you know, the war on drugs was mostly, the drug research money was mostly going in to look at what is bad about cannabis, not what is good. It's kind of like our gun laws, where the feds will put all kinds of money into defending gun rights, but they won't fund studies to show how terrible guns can be from a public health perspective. So back to your question, Trey, it's a little confusing. It's right now. It's a little inconsistent right now that the department has one standard for healthcare providers and another for other adults. It contributes obviously to a problem with providers being knowledgeable enough to speak with their patients about cannabis if they themselves have never used it, and if they are being fed misinformation by their own licensing body. And a lot of healthcare providers, of course, don't have anything to do with cannabis, right? Because that was drilled into them in medical school, through the whole institutions that they've gone through in order to get their license. But I think times will change. I mean, we've seen them change in the last 5 years, heavens in the last 10. So it's, I feel optimistic. But I do also want to touch on something that Trey said. I'm only licensed in Washington state. So when I reference state laws, it's going to be Washington laws. I can speak about federal law and point out some of the weird contradictions that are currently existing.
No, and that was.
And Lindsay just asked, is this law specific? Thanks, Lindsay, for your question. The law that that I was talking about with healthcare providers, that's just Washington, as far as I know. But it would not surprise me if other states have similar restrictions.
Well, for instance, the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, has basically told their veterinarians it's too early.
Mhm.
The proof is not in. You're not to speak to your patient's owners, to dog and pet or dog and cat and lizard owners about cannabis. And they've kind of thrown the hammer down and said it's too early, don't do it. And so it puts them in a real precarious position when somebody comes in and says, hey, well, what do you know about cannabis? And the veterinarian likely didn't get the didn't get it in med school.
Right.
Like you said, just like the doctors. So it's interesting to see the barriers that exist when the public's not ahead of the science, but ahead of the regulators and the government in this case.
Mhm.
So the impact is real, though. I mean, you have helped defend. I mean, there are people who've gone to school for years to study, and then over this matter have either been threatened or lost their license. Correct?
Yeah, that is true. It's pretty devastating, but that has happened. The veterinarians are also licensed by the Department of Health, which is kind of interesting. And the Department of Health's open position is we can't give any guidance to veterinarians. They cite the conflict between state and federal law, the fact that our legislature has not specifically decided what laws should apply to veterinarians in this area. And so until then, DOH is really kind of hands off on it. They are definitely aware that products are being marketed and being marketed for pets, and that veterinarians speak with their patients about it. But they are interestingly quiet. And I've actually not represented a veterinarian yet. I would love to if that comes up. But I actually haven't even heard very many stories, just anecdotes,
Right.
really.
And those of you in that class might have read the story, but our dog had a major stroke. She was 14 years old, 14 or 15 at the time, and took her to the vet. I thought she had gotten into our butter because she couldn't stand up, and he said no, she's had a stroke and her brain is swollen and she's gonna die. He said unless we can get the swelling down. And we had talked about what I do, and he said you might have something better than me. I don't know to tell you how much to give her, but it's good for I know it's good for inflammation, and we saved her life thanks to this veterinarian who went out on a limb and wasn't supposed to do that, wasn't supposed to talk about it at all, and acknowledge, hey, I don't know much, but I know that you might have what's available, what's needed. So I really feel for folks, if a doctor hasn't been trained on it but has been taught to rely in science, but not been exposed to the science, unless they're going out and seeking it, they're not growing and nobody's pushing them, to catch up with the public.
And not only that, but also the Department of Health, I'm pretty sure they're still doing this. They do send in fake patients sometimes to healthcare providers to see if they can get an authorization inappropriately. I defended one of those cases. It's a kind of a shocking way for them to be spending our taxpayer dollars doing that, but it happens. And so if a provider seems skeptical about talking about it, just realize where they're coming from. But they worked real hard for their career and they're wanting to preserve it.
What are some mistakes people are making that you're seeing? I don't, not by name, but what are some things that make you wince when your clients come in and say, well, I did this, and it just the logic of them, it has skipped them, and they're partaking in bad. Let me ask you this way: do you have clients who are making bad decisions and you go, gosh, I don't know how many times I have to tell different people this bit of advice? Is there something like that in that category you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, well, people often call a lawyer when they're in trouble. Sometimes people call lawyers proactively, looking for compliance advice. That's awesome. That doesn't happen all that often. When you're speaking it, one thing that came to mind was a dentist that came to me, and she had been authorized in cannabis. And her reasoning was, my scope of prescription authority is far greater than a naturopath, which is true. Yet naturopaths can authorize, and she knew that. And so she therefore figured, I must be able to as well. That is not true. And it actually would not have been that hard for her to Google it. She literally could have Googled it, or she could have asked an attorney for that information. So what I've often seen are very reasonable and smart people applying very reasonable logic to their actions, but not double checking the law, because the law doesn't always unfold the way you think it should. And whether or not dentists should be allowed to authorize, I think is an interesting question. I know that other states are looking at it. I think her argument was right on, that she's got a far greater prescription authority already. And we know that people frequently self-medicate with cannabis before going to the dentist. So of all people that should be cognizant of cannabis, I think dentists make a lot of sense. But
For sure.
So far, that's not been a push in Washington.
A
I think it should be,
dentist,
though.
a dentist told me, he said, look, if I have to pull one more tooth so somebody can get a refill on their opiates, I'm just going to scream. I was like, what? And person said, oh, yeah, somebody will fake that a tooth is killing them to get it pulled so that they can get a prescription. And she said, I had to tell somebody, look, you're running out of teeth for me to pull. And you can doctor shop, but once you're out of teeth, the problem was so severe. So, gosh, anytime cannabis and was it Lindsay? You're in the opiates class, did you say? Yeah, so the stories are tragic, and luckily there's some accountability going on from the federal government, but we do see that in communities where medical cannabis is available, people use less opiates. And so dentists certainly, like you said, front lines see that.
And regarding the opioid crisis, and I'd love to hear a bit more about that class that you're taking, Lindsay. They've actually, when they're looking at the opioid epidemic and how it started and when it really started taking off, one of the factors they realized is actually people getting their wisdom teeth pulled, which usually happens around the age of 17 or 18. That was my first experience with Vicodin. It was awesome. I had no idea up until that point that I could be happy at home. So yeah, that was like, a lot of people's first experience with opioids is at the dentist. So it makes sense for them to think about other methods of pain control and anxiety control.
That was for me too. And 17, 18, 19 are, dangerous times to have a lot of extra medicine sitting around anyway. So potentially, right? So talk to me a little bit more about it. I know people are looking to at least decriminalization on a federal level, or at least people seem more hopeful now. We keep, everybody wants to say it's about to happen, but now seems like there's more light on that than ever before. What are some things you're advising people to consider in advance of that? Or are you finding yourself giving people advice, or people come to you and say, hey, I want to be prepared for this shift, whether it's in my rights or what I'm able to do, or anything along that line?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's not like I have a crystal ball. It's really hard to predict how things are going to unfold. My sense, and I would love to hear other people's perspective, is that the feds are not going to legalize this or deschedule it or reschedule it anytime real soon. I just don't see that happening. So in addition to helping healthcare providers in cannabis, I also work with people who own cannabis businesses. And I've had a lot of queries lately from people who own shops saying, is this the time to sell? And which surprised me, because I would say no. I don't think if the feds are going to change their stance, I think we'll get a little bit more warning on it. And also, there's so many things going wrong right now in our country. I can't see Biden being like, oh, I think I'll get into cannabis. Like, that's going to help anything. So I just don't believe it's going to change in the next 2 or 3 years, or maybe even 4 or 5 years. I'd be willing to put down like $50 on it. But I'd love to know what other people, what your sense is, especially people in other states, how they feel that the country might look at cannabis.
Well, yeah, and I think it's all speculation, right? Until we know, but the right people seem to be having the conversations. But like you said, we could remain a feudal system, this patchwork, coat of many colors of cannabis laws for years to come. Idaho's not coming on anytime soon. They've just said that they're, Georgia and South Carolina are way behind the ball.
in fact, this weird system we have set up now, and it was basically an experiment, right? That's what the Cole memo was about when Obama was here, when he was saying, okay, states, you guys want to do this, do it within these certain parameters and we won't mess with you. We'll just see how it works out. And how's it worked out? It's been really good for tax revenue. And we haven't seen like major cartels formed. In fact, we've seen, some cannabis use has dropped for some of the concerning age groups, like teenagers. So this experiment that's gone on has, I think, worked out a little better than a lot of people thought. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, we should just let it go. Let's let it go for a little bit longer. And, Biden says he's going to be a one-term president, or he plans on being a one-term president. If he got a second term, I could maybe see this being an issue, but I don't see this being a first-term issue for any president.
Yeah, I just don't know, right? I know people need to be ready to get their head around it and that sort of thing. But at the very least, if we can stop arresting people, if we can all agree to that, we can agree on limits later and age, how old you have to be and, how little you can have in your blood to drive and all that. But if we just stop locking people up and agree on that part for starters, and then have some kind of equal starting line on getting licenses in the states that haven't already, done it wrong. So anyway, I don't know. I'm afraid it'll be just a rush for the green. I know I've heard local Washington people say, hey, well, I don't know what that means for us. We're a small family-owned operation, and when McDonald's of weed comes to town, how do we compete? And it's sad to hear people say that, with people who've built this industry.
Well, probably some of the folks here on this chat in Washington saw the way that the deregulation went, and a lot of small mom and pop businesses or individual businesses didn't make it. They didn't make it through the licensure procedure, or they got swallowed up, or they just didn't have the money for the compliance, because it's really actually quite expensive to get all the legal compliance. And back in the day, banking was even more of a mess. So unfortunately, the market has shifted already to favoring kind of the bigger players. And unfortunately, as Trey kind of referenced before, there is kind of like a male dominance, and it's a white male dominance in this field, which is heartbreaking, because there's always been a lot of white men in cannabis, but there are a lot of other people too. And a lot of them are no longer in the industry because of the way regulation was rolled out. And I don't know if that happened in other states too. I suspect it probably did, but I'm just not
And we're not talking about golf, right? Going national. It's not. Cannabis is popular with every segment of the society. It's the most diverse community you can belong to. So the fact that just one little segment gets head starts, it's wrong. Florida's program was super expensive to get into. The program that the what's the guy from the boy band that wanted to start a program in Ohio but only give out 10 licenses? He wanted to be one of them.
Right.
And the voters voted it down. But yeah, all kind of weirdness. Now, Nevada, you all are lucky because you have a great head start on the nationalization move because you have vertical integration. So it's a cheaper way to go. When you can go from seed to sale and do the sale too, then you're better positioned. It's a cheaper operation and it's scalable. So I think y'all will be ahead of us on that curve. But we'll see. Let me open it up though. I've dominated your time, and I want to say what we're going to do is we're going to do the first hour like we do traditionally on a live chat, and then at top of the hour at 6, Nicole's going to remain here as kind of open office hours and just hang with you. It's going to be no agenda, so if you're welcome to ask questions now, but if you also want to hang back, we won't be recording, and y'all can it's kind of hanging out in the living room chatting sort of thing. That works. Who's got a question?
It looks like Kiara put one into the chat box.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, no, Oregon has not decriminalized all drugs. I think you might be thinking about the psilocybin initiative.
Well, they did a decriminalization. They're like they did actually, and they just released all drugs, and they just released what those, because somebody on the Alliance chat this week was reading off the allowable limits of LSD and mushrooms or psilocybin and all this sort. So, and there's a not a partner bill, but there's a similar bill that is being debated in Olympia tomorrow. It's being introduced. It's already passed, I think, passed out of one committee. And so it's up for consideration tomorrow in Washington. So keep an eye out. I don't have the bill number, but I'll find it here shortly.
Yeah, and actually Ashley just chimed in too that there was, Ashley, were you saying that the ballot measure, this is an Oregon ballot measure, is that what?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, the February 1st, 2021.
Now it doesn't, I don't think it provides for any kind of commercial sale. This is all about personal use, but it's personal use for everybody. So you don't have to prove you're a patient. It's like the idea is to treat first and arrest second. You know, the priority we all should have had all along. You don't arrest people for, you know, we don't arrest somebody if they wanted to take a shot of gasoline. It's bad for them, but we're not going to arrest them for it. So hopefully we're thinking more clearly about the whole drug war thing. It's a vast experiment though. You know, some of the lawmakers are really um, going out on a limb, and I know it's been done in Portugal, and Denver and Oakland might have similar measures, but we'll see.
I just put into the chat box a link to an article. Thank you so much for educating me at this chat group about the decriminalization that's happened. So it's about small
Personal
of small
use
amounts.
Yeah.
Right. And again, so decriminalization is not the same as regulation. It's not the same as legalization. But that's a really good step in the right direction.
I do know two licensees here in the state of Washington who've already announced, one in a very public forum online and another one on Instagram, that they already have a product in development. One was a psilocybin tea and the other are psilocybin caps. And it said coming soon. We've been brewing. And so it's pretty public. It's a little bit more brave than I would be. But they might figure, just like the gray market or the almost legal market for cannabis, there's a lot of opportunity to be had. So I think we're about to see a lot of interesting things. Only concern of mine is that, change that happens too fast can have a severe backlash. And I want us to do it. I want us to do it well if we're going to do it, and people appreciate the science behind what we're doing. And, and I think we can stop arresting people today. But as far as, like with Oregon's rollout, I don't know what kind of public education is going on around that. And, it's still terrifying if somebody's kid gets into their acid. It's not going to kill them, but it's going to scare everybody. So.
Looks like Lindsay, you have your hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I was wondering how far you think we are from legalization on home growing. So for personal use, and what types of hurdles there are in Washington, and what really is the reason that they're giving for not allowing that?
Yeah, well, it is possible to home grow. Trey, you are a home farmer.
Well, there is for patients, but the bill is up in Olympia right now, and it's if I can give a little bit of feedback, because I just heard the update this morning, and it's closer than it's ever been. It's got support. 151 people signed off in supporting the concept, and what they did strategically was have very few people get up and testify for it, because the thinking is when you have the votes, you don't do much talking. So the strategy on that, it seems like things are lining up well. It's out of the Commerce and Gaming Committee, and right now the support from the legislature is positive, and it looks like it wouldn't cost the state a lot of money. And Washington State actually testified, said we've done an economic impact study, and home grow brings in a lot more money, just like microbrewing did for Colorado. There's a vast market for you sell lights, you sell tents, you sell seeds, you sell soil, and people still buy tomatoes at the store even if they grow tomatoes at home. So it looks positive.
I, of course, am always worried. That's part of the job of a lawyer, is to always think of the worst case scenario. And worst case is, hey, it's still federally illegal. Federal forfeiture laws still exist. They are still enforced. They still apply. So if there's going to be home grows in Washington that are registered, where you give the state your name and address, you basically, that list is a list of people who are breaking federal law, right? So thankfully our federal government seems to have taken a slightly better turn than it has in the last couple of years, but still, I don't know if I would trust them.
Cool. All right, I don't need these gloves now.
Yeah, it's interesting, and those of you who aren't familiar with the search and seizure that Nicole's talking about, the RICO laws out of the Reagan administration back in the 80s were the inspiration for Miami Vice. That's why those guys drove all the big boats
right.
and had all the fancy clothes, because it was drug money. They were taken, and they take your house, your car, your boat, your vehicles, and say, well, it was all part of the operation. And in some cases it was. But
and in fact, not even just a part of the operation, but whatever you spent with that money. So actually, I added a line to my legal services agreements because I actually read a case where the lawyer's legal fees that he had earned by representing, and this is not in Washington, he earned by representing a guy who handled drugs, that law firm had to give back all the money. So that's, so we don't want that either. So yeah, it's even whatever you bought with the money.
Wow. So yeah, it's a serious proposition, and that's why, why this has been a losing proposition for citizens since the beginning. Even small violations, a single plant in your house could jeopardize you. So
yeah, you don't want to go to jail. Honestly, the criminal justice system it's a force that's best avoided if possible.
Now, there is, to the question though, there is also a bill on the table to provide arrest protection for all patients. Right now, it's written as for patients in the registry, so that would expand patient rights in Washington. Once again, Nevada, you're ahead of us. You have the right to home grow, but only if you're 25 miles from a dispensary, or if you got grandfathered in. Some people were already part of the medical program there, got grandfathered in. Luckily, they looked out for those folks, but everybody else kind of got, anyway, didn't get the good end of the deal on that. But
that's really interesting. I had not heard that about Nevada.
And that's a long way, 25 miles to drive. It's better than we used to, but still, they looked out for their retailers.
So Trey, with that update that you just gave about all patients, how do they then distinguish between a patient and an adult use user?
I think your paperwork, your authorization from your physician.
Okay, so you need to have the authorization.
You just don't have to then get a card and go into the registry, but you will have to, as I understand, have to have that paperwork to prove, and if it's expired, you're SOL. But
okay,
yeah. What other questions, y'all?
I see a question here about vertical integration. Winisa, you said, can you expand on vertical integration? Can you say a little bit more about your question?
Well, I heard Trey mention that, and he said that was here in Nevada only.
Oh, well,
some expansion on that. I don't know what that is.
Sure, I'm sorry. So in Washington, if you're allowed to be a grower and a processor, so you can grow it and then you can make it into candy, or you can make it into tea or whatever, or you can be a retailer, but you can't be a retailer in any of these other two categories. And so I don't know the thinking exactly. Maybe to spread around the licenses, or for whatever reason, it becomes more expensive to do business then, and if in the case of Nevada, I can own the farm. I can be the one that turns it into oil and makes vape carts, and be the one that owns the store to sell it to you. So I can also kind of effectively cut down on my competition, because I'm selling you my product next to a competitor product. So there are a lot of commercial advantages that states like Nevada, you're not the only vertical integration state, but it's seen as more pro-business, kind of more big business in some ways, because then it gets less, it gets harder to compete. I don't know. I don't know the whole economics behind it, but yeah, they're two very different systems. And here we used to have a 25% excise tax between each stage. So, from farm to process was 25, from process to retail was 25. and then they changed it to be a flat 37%, which is still amazing.
A lot.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
of course.
It'll be really interesting for the business folks and economics folks to analyze the rollout of cannabis businesses in various states. It's really, I don't have that expertise, but I think it's really fascinating.
Oh, for sure. Agreed. How about you, Nicole? You're operating under a license. What kind of pressure? How difficult was it to make this decision? And then, do you feel any continued pressure because of the decision you made, as far as like your license being protected and you feeling safe about maintaining it?
Oh, thanks for asking that, Trey, because that's right. If you're a lawyer in Washington State, you also have to have a license. That license is controlled by the Washington State Supreme Court. Lawyers have to work under a code of professional conduct. These are the rules of professional conduct. And amongst those rules is that lawyers cannot do anything illegal, right? I need to obey state and federal law. And then when marijuana became regulated and was essentially had laws around it in Washington State, they talked about, well, do we need to update the rules of professional conduct for lawyers? And the King County Bar Association lobbied the Supreme Court saying we should amend the rules to say that lawyers can do anything legal in Washington and practice any legal area of law in Washington. And our Supreme Court, in a rather spineless move, I believe, rejected that and instead put a little footnote in there and said, unless and until the federal government says otherwise, Washington lawyers can practice any law in Washington, right? So that's like tomorrow, if the feds were to change things, then yeah, probably my law license could be challenged. I think I'd be in pretty good company at this point, given the number of attorneys who are practicing in cannabis law. But I can say that when I first started in this area, it was one, defending clients that I already had. Plus my sister has multiple sclerosis. And so medical marijuana has actually been a part of our lives for 30 years. So it wasn't a hard thing for me to get into. Cannabis has also been a part of my life since I was myself 22. So it was a delightful addition to my career. Not when I struggled with it all, but what I did find was just kind of amazed at the skepticism and ignorance amongst other lawyers who, by the way, drink a lot and are known for their own drug use. The people that were just like kind of appalled, because cannabis is was very looked down upon. But I wouldn't have got through law school without it. So I'm very happy to do it.
Thanks for sharing that. No, thanks for sharing that. It's like hearing an NBA player is like, hey, you liked me when I was playing with the help of cannabis. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's important for people to hear and understand that so many stoner stereotypes persist, and that we are no good or worthless or, too lazy or whatever. And I think too few people know how many highly functioning, highly intelligent people use cannabis on the daily, right?
Absolutely.
Or
this is
use
what daily
cannabis at all.
cannabis looks like, frankly.
Lindsay,
Okay.
you have a question?
Yeah, so I am aware of a cannabis licensee here in Washington State who attempted to purchase a home, and that is denied because of federally legal reasons of where their money comes from, and then it would be federally insured and whatnot. I was just wondering, how do they differentiate between, like, I can have a bank account, I could potentially own a home as an employee of a cannabis company, but a cannabis company owner is restricted from those things? Like, what are those distinctions?
That's really interesting. And that's not one I've heard before. That makes me think that maybe the mortgage that they were going for was a federally backed mortgage, and they're going through a bank that is concerned about their FDIC insurance, maybe. Because I wonder if they went to a credit union, like a Washington-based bank, if they would encounter that same problem. They shouldn't, because I mean there was the legislature here did try to make an effort to get state banking, functioning in this area, because it's just not safe having everyone running around
Right.
with all this cash. That doesn't
Yeah.
make any real sense. That's interesting. It just makes me think that it was the bank's problem, and there are other banks out there, because I don't see the rules in Washington state that would prevent that.
I'll tell you what happened today. I had to call a bank credit union because BECU won't take our account. Although we're not cannabis touching, we're not a licensee. We're strictly in education with all accredited partners. Like, we checked all the boxes. They're like, but that cannabis word, it's in your name. It's in your name. I'm like, but we don't touch the plant. It's all virtual. We have students from all over the world, but we don't like that word. And so I had to get on. I had to get on with another. It's called a bank I've never heard of. But I want to plug them for at least considering it. They hadn't called me back yet. But anyway, it's like B Online, some small credit union kind of thing, and some people are paying high fees just to have the privilege to keep an account at a bank. Because they say, well, you're a risk. For You're going to have to pay us to have an account with us, and that has happened here for years now.
Yeah, well, it'd be a little surprising if banks were, the revolutionaries. They're not usually.
Yeah, right. But that is one of the things. They look like they're. We might see some of this roll out, not all of a sudden, but in stages. Banking is one of those things that looks pretty positive right now, as far as lowering some barriers. So that's a good question, Lindsay.
Yeah, really interesting. Goose, were you raising your hand too?
Yeah. So I've been on a chat before with Trey, and we've talked about the banking.
Oh,
And,
I just lost you.
oh, sorry. You got me?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I've been on a chat before with Trey, and we've talked about the banking. And realistically, it would be nice if we were, as an industry, able to bank at federal banks and be able to take cards at counters where people are tapping instead of handing cash back and forth, and just the overall handling of cash. What I'm really getting into is I work with a business that we've been robbed 5 times in the last year and a half between all of our stores. And I don't know if there's somebody working the legal part of how that product, and if money is gone, can be recovered. We shouldn't be an industry that's just unrecoverable. So, I would think that somewhere along the way, everybody would get involved with lobbyists to start working on this safety aspect of what banking does to us as an industry of being non-safe.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's just terrible.
I haven't been in any of the stores when they've been robbed, but I hear about them on our job page, and they all sound horrific. But it's like our owners can't keep taking hits like this, and if it's all their own recoverable money that they have to put back into it, eventually somewhere laws, insurance, banking has to get in with this, because it's unfair for people who really invest in this to get really hit hard when something as unfortunate as a robbery happens.
Oh, and it's not just the business owner too, but I don't know if the business owns its own building, but if not, then the landlord's probably not very pleased either about being targeted frequently. And that could really disrupt business operations too. That's frustrating.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Goose, know that there's a person with Seattle PD who it's her job to go to businesses like yours and advise them on safety protocols. And so the police have a team of people that will do that for free, and they'll walk you through and say, that's a problem, you need to consider this, at least advise you on safe practices, and even train your staff on that sort of thing. So if your employer, and that goes for everybody, make sure that your employer, if you're working in a retail or a licensed place where there's a lot of product, make sure there's safety protocols in place, and don't feel bad about asking, because a lot of these businesses are new and they haven't thought about it yet. But expect and kind of push for that, just for your own personal safety.
Yeah, and we have a pretty good security and safety program, and it seems the pattern is people come right before close. right before close, and we've got 2 of our locations are really near freeway on ramp. So it's just, and the police are aware. It's just you know, they're aware. They do more patrols. They, you know, they come into our businesses, they talk with us, but it's just a, you know, it all, I think a lot of it just has to do with the banking part of it and cash.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And you know, some stores, they have the last hour of operation, everybody's supposed to be on the floor, so nobody's in the back. You got a lot of eyes on the floor. Still, it's not a real fix, but
Right.
it's a step closer to safety.
Thank you.
No,
Perhaps
good
on the
point.
bright side, since of course banking is all about money, and banking products like insurance products are major money makers,
Mhm.
I bet, and money really pushes our country around, that we may see some changes in banking just purely because they want to put their hands on that money.
Right.
Oh, for real.
But at the same time, I mean, most banks want to have their FDIC insurance, which has a cap on it. They don't want to lose that because that's obviously protecting their cash. So until I think that, like, whether or not the Feds ever, you know, deschedule or reschedule cannabis, they could still do something about the banking. They
Right.
could do some tweaks to banking laws without touching cannabis specifically. I
Yeah.
don't know how likely that is to happen though, because someone's got to push for it.
Right.
Thank you very much for being here tonight, Nicole. It looks
Oh,
like
I'm
we
delighted.
answered all the immediate questions. Like I said, the way this will work is we will I would suggest we take a 5-minute break, let people hit the restroom, get another drink or whatever you need to do, let the dog out, and then come back, and Nicole will continue to be here. And I've made her the host, so I'll actually dip out and let y'all just talk, because I did a lot of talking. So I would love for you to get acquainted with her. Besides, I should have started with this. Nicole has been with us since our founding in 2015. So she's been with us now this is our 6th year. And so we're really glad and proud to be working with her. This is one of the first cannabis and law classes that I know of existed. And I know we've been able to expose a lot of people, answer a lot of questions, and it's great to have all y'all here tonight.